That's a little depressing. Someone asked me a happy question.
I have a question. I'm not so sure if I, from a certain perspective, agree the idea that we have something so unique in this whole idea of universal truth. And my own understanding of universal truth, I would even question myself, which poses a problem in and of itself, that I've been a Jodo Shinshu all my years, and I still have a question of what is this universal truth. I can articulate it, but what it really means, that's a problem in and of itself. Okay, but that aside, because I think from the general community's viewpoint, if we present them with this notion of this is what we have unique, I'm not so sure if that's so unique. I think there are many other traditions, Christian and otherwise, that present the same kind of universal truth, at least in practice they do. Maybe when you go into their theology and their understanding, maybe they'll see some separations, man from the rest of the creatures on earth, etc., as a separation. But for the general public, I don't think it makes a whole lot of difference. I think what makes a difference more is what they see in practice. And what I see in practice, possibly, is that they are practicing universal truth. And so if we are to try and tell people or communicate that we have something unique, I'm not so sure if that's going to be it, because I don't think people will see it that way.
Okay, very good. Let me try to clarify that. I'm actually not trying to talk about universal truth. I don't think that there's a particular universal truth that's unique to Jodo Shinshu. If we want to talk about truth in general in that way, which, like I say, it's not really my orientation, but the truths are shared in Buddhism. Buddhism, in general, is related to the Dharma. The Dharma means truth, basically, means reality. So the universal truth is universal throughout Buddhism, at least, and possibly other religions as well, to some degree. What's different about the different types of Buddhism is how they apply themselves to that kind of shared truth. Okay, the programs they put in place to help people to understand those things. That's basically what differentiates different types of Buddhism. So some people do this type of meditation or that type of meditation, this type of chant, that's a type of chant. These are a lot of the things, it's the different practices that at the end divide most of the Buddhisms from each other. What I'm trying to talk about is not truth, but basically vision or orientation or perspective. Jodo Shinshu, at least in Shinran, and I take Shinran to be an important source for Jodo Shinshu, is very universalistic, very, very universalistic. It attempts to bring Buddhism to all people. It tries to teach them that where they are, as who they are, right now, they are embraced. They don't have to become saints. That's something that other Buddhisms don't say. Even Buddhisms that are also designed for the masses, such as Nichiren Buddhism and this sort of stuff, they still expect that you're going to do their practice and you're going to change and become a saint through doing this sort of practice. And during this lifetime, you'll be able to fulfill certain aspects of Buddhism, the precepts and other things like that, through their sort of practices. Jodo Shinshu doesn't say that. It's very different, I think, than a lot of these other Buddhisms, because it goes to where people are right now. It says, as you are right now, you're already being embraced. So that, that's that kind of vision is what's very intriguing to me. Again, it's not about truth. It's about that kind of perspective, I guess. Yeah.
I was more referring to some of the other traditions, the Christian traditions. How they have done world visions and how they promote not necessarily Christianity, but that's certainly in the back of what they do in part. But the kind of missions they do around the world. Sorry to use the word mission, but what they do around the world, in terms of helping people, helping the homeless, helping the poor, helping wherever they're out there practicing this whole idea of we're all part of one.
Yes. Yes,
I was referring more to them than the other Buddhist denominations.
Well, I'm sorry, what was the last?
No, I was referring basically to them rather than the other Buddhist denominations in making that notion about what we have unique.
Sure. There's basically two types of Christian missions. There's the type that are explicitly trying to convert people out of what they are now and turn them into what the Christians want them to be. And then there's the kind of mission which doesn't have those kind of theological strings attached and is simply kind of out of the goodness of their hearts, okay? So let's contrast these two. The first type is universalistic of a type. It believes that Christianity is valid for all people, but it also believes that what's going on everywhere outside of their own group is wrong, and those people have to change or else they're going to burn in hell for eternity, right? This is a very particular type of universalism, which is quite different from the basic Buddhist viewpoint on these things, right? So we'll put that aside. We'll talk, I think you mean more the sort of charitable missions that are purely, let's call them humanitarian, basically. I think that's what you're gesturing towards, right? Yeah, I agree. Christianity basically has a better track record than Buddhism does, including Jodo Shinshu, in terms of delivering those sort of humanitarian services to people. I'm not necessarily sure whether that's because of specific things that are intrinsic to Christianity or intrinsic to Buddhism. I wonder, as a historian, whether a lot of that is connected to particular historical developments in the industrialized, urbanizing, mission-minded West, because all of these humanitarian efforts are just the evolution of what were originally conversion efforts. And they, over time, from the 19th into the 20th century, changed, partly as Christianity liberalized and many missionaries lost their kind of trust in what they were trying to speak. They still wanted to be involved in the world, and so they moved more into a humanitarian direction. So it comes out of basically a type of imperialism originally at the root of these humanitarian efforts. Like, we'll go there and we'll change them into us, that sort of thing. Now, nowadays, it can be very humanitarian, very excellent, and you know, I've been involved in some of these activities, either as a donor or helping out locally, this sort of thing. That's great. But again, I don't know that it arises out of Christianity specifically and not out of specific, you know, Western trends that were going on that we didn't see in the same thing going on in Japanese society. I just don't know. I'm sorry, that's kind of a lame answer. The problem is that I don't know enough about the history of how those things have come about. Certainly the Buddhists also have their humanitarian efforts, but I think it's objective to say that they haven't been on the same level. I put them all to sleep.
Nobody was going to ask. I'd just like to make a comment on the universalism. One, I don't think it's good to talk about uniqueness because we don't know all the options that are out there. But I think we could talk about distinctiveness, you know, something which is peculiar, say, to a particular thing.
That's what I'm trying to do.
In this case, in the case of universalism, I quite agree with your discussion, and I think you were coming to it, is that universalism is across the board. There are all kinds of universalisms, expression of that. But I think the distinctive part of Buddhism is that it's non-dualistic. The West is dualistic. And so the question is, our contribution to this culture is to get us away from well, this morning's paper had Christianity and competition are kind of united. Well, that's dualism. See, that's an expression of dualism, which goes back to neo-Darwinism and even further to the Greeks and so on, and their Hellenism, which was to go out and dominate the world. So what Buddhism may offer is a non-dualistic universalism, which, as you're pointing out, is inclusive. It doesn't say there's the bad person and there's the good person, and so if you become part of the good, then you're part of the universal sort of dimension. But it's universally because it's applicable. But it distinguishes within that universality something is good and something is bad. And so we have all the contrasts, good, bad, good, evil, and so on, you know. And so I think that's where the universalism is given. But the question is, what kind of universalism that we're talking about? And how does that then apply, the implications of that for society, for culture, and so on, personal mode of life. So I just wanted to.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, this morning I was talking about how Shin Buddhism can potentially be moved toward a more inclusive vision. As I tried to stress, there are rich resources within the tradition itself that can be brought forward in order to cultivate a more open, all-embracing ideal. And I believe this would be not only useful for the survival and growth of Jodo Shinshu in America, but in my opinion, it's actually important as a way to remain true to the Bodhisattva spirit of Shinran himself. In short, I feel he would have been somewhat disappointed with our failure to make the religion founded in his name into our failure to make it into a truly universal path that actively includes people of all types. I also indicated that I think we should be thinking about what is distinctive and valuable about Jodo Shinshu. That is to say, what Shin Buddhism offers to America that one may not always be able to find in other religions or even in other forms of Buddhism. Of course, if we're going to go through this sort of thought process about what is really valuable to us about Shin Buddhism in particular, this necessitates that we think deeply about what the qualities of Shin Buddhism are and look for ways to articulate these qualities to people who don't have any familiarity with the foreign terms and the unusual concepts that we tend to employ when we talk to people about Jodo Shinshu. We can try to be as open and as inclusive as possible, but if we can't communicate what it is about Shinshu that we think others should pay attention to, then it's all going to be for naught, right? So my talk this afternoon is titled Shin Buddhism in Contemporary America, and I'm going to stress 4 specific themes that we can keep in mind as we interact with non-Shinshuists and try to express our tradition to them. The themes are relaxing, trusting, thanking, and fearlessness. Relaxing means an emphasis on being who we are and on naturalness instead of striving. Trusting means cultivating a vision of our inner togetherness and turning toward power beyond the self. Thanking means living an expressive Buddhist life of gratitude that puts our inner feelings into action in the world. And fearlessness means focusing on Shin's function as a religion without anxiety, which provides hope and courage in a difficult world. Of course, I'm going to talk, I'm going to expand on these now. So if I said that too quickly, don't worry. We're going to go over this ground many times in the next little while. I'll start by talking about the first 3 keywords that we can use to help others understand Shin Buddhism. They are relax, trust, and thank. Please note that these are verbs. These are actions. These are not beliefs. There's a tendency, I think, to overemphasize the so-called theological side of Jodo Shinshu when explaining it to others. Beliefs are not unimportant, of course, but one of the common observations is that Buddhism is more about actions, about practices, rather than about doctrines and dogmas. When we talk about Shin Buddhism, we can help others to understand it by focusing on what it is that we do. That's why I've called forward these 3 verbs for us to talk about. First on my list is relaxing. Just as we are embraced by boundless compassion. This means that, in distinction from other forms of Buddhism, Shin values naturalness rather than striving to become or pretend to be something that we are not, especially because such efforts are so often ego-based. Most religions ask you to be something other than who and what you are. They want you to become holy or pure or good enough in order to qualify to enter heaven or achieve Buddhahood or whatever ultimate goal it is that they hold out in front of the believer. We live in a predominantly Christian country, so we're all aware that there are many Christians who teach people that they have to stop sinning or else they're going to roast in hell for eternity. Even kids on the playground, as I kind of indicated this morning, they used to tell me that I was damned because I hadn't accepted Jesus Christ as my personal Savior, and that my damnation and never-ending physical torture that would result from it were entirely justified due to my own faults. So, obviously they wanted me to change who I was, change into something else other than what I was, become something better in order to avoid that sort of fate. There's just one big problem to this common approach to religion. And the problem is that we're not, in fact, really all that good. We may try, but life is hard, and we are weak. And few people can measure up to the standards that are set by religion. Worse yet, if we manage to make some progress, it itself turns into an obstacle. The more holy we get, the more puffed up our egos become. And this removes us from fellowship with other ordinary people. This is, again, something that I mentioned when I was responding to the question about my own process. So you can see why this is an important point to me. It's something that I've experienced. So at least for me, I understand this to be true. In the quest to kill the ego, we feed it ever more food and tell ourselves that we're becoming truly spiritual. This is something that I've personally experienced in my life. And it was a core insight of Shinran's own teaching, as important in its own way as the Shin teaching to the Shin teaching as the Primal Vow is, I would say. In answer to this dilemma, Jodo Shinshu offers us some wonderful advice. Just relax. I'm reminded of the parable that Ken Tanaka tells in his book Ocean. I think many of us may be aware of this, right? In this parable, a sailor is on a boat in the middle of the ocean when one night he accidentally falls off into the water. And it's so late at night, the ship leaves him behind, and he's all alone out there in the dark in the middle of the ocean, in the water. He struggles and he struggles to stay afloat, splashing about wildly and entangling himself in his waterlogged clothes. He gets more and more tired as time goes on, and it looks like he's never going to be able to survive this situation. But just when things seem hopeless in this parable that Ken tells, the sailor realizes that he doesn't have to struggle. He relaxes and he lies back, onto his back with his arms and his legs spread comfortably around him. Just as he is, the ocean supports him and floats him along without any of his own effort. It was his own inadequate efforts that put him at risk. And now as he accepts the strength of the ocean in place of his own, he's delivered from danger. The ocean currents push him along, and he's brought to an island where he can find all of his needs taken care of. This is that parable he tells. Uh-oh, we've got a cell phone. I'll just let that finish. In my classes, I dock them a mark if their cell phone goes off. And those students, I have to say, they are wedded to their cell phones. It's like torture for me to tell them that they can't have them on all the time. They don't even like the fact that I won't let them talk or text during my class. It's really quite a phenomenon. Anyways, so back to our story here. There's another image that comes to my mind when I think of the importance of relaxing in the Shin tradition. Have you guys seen the old Far Side cartoon by Gary Larson that shows a boy trying to get into the school for gifted children? Maybe you've seen this one. He's standing outside and he's pushing on the door, but he just can't get in. Meanwhile, so he's pushing, right? Because he wants to get into the school. It's for gifted children, the really smart children. The best of the bunch, right? If only he can get in, then he'll be happy because he's a nerdy little guy with glasses and this sort of stuff, right? Okay? But meanwhile, he's so consumed by these futile efforts to push his way through the door that he completely fails to notice the sign on the door that says pull, right? This is basically the Shin view of life boiled down to its essence, right there. We strive and we strive and we strive, all the while failing to perceive that the door of awakening opens inward. When we get out of the way and let the process happen naturally, that's when we're liberated by Amida without having to become saints or Zen masters. The next key word I brought up here is trust. As I discussed this morning when I talked about inner togetherness, your life is given to you by countless things in the universe. Instead of focusing on our selfish desires, we're better off learning to appreciate and trust the interconnectedness that sustains us. From before the moment we were born, innumerable causes and conditions have been leading to our life. Whether it continues for another day or for another 100 years, Each moment is a precious gift that we receive unearned. Our lives are upheld by sun, moon, dirt, air, water, by family, friends, co-workers, society, plants, animals, all things. Everything we need to live is here already, and we can be happy with what we have. And of course, this point has further importance for Shin Buddhists who rely on the great compassion of Amida Buddha as assurance that we are fine just as we are, and that our worries will not follow us into the next world. Indeed, they don't even need to plague us right now if we can open our hearts and trust to other power. For Shin Buddhists, trusting in power beyond the self, the power of great compassion, is the way beyond the suffering caused by attachment to the false self. In Buddhism, we talk about how we seek to go over to the other shore, to nirvana, the Pure Land, Buddhahood. But in Jodo Shinshu, we don't have to ferry ourselves all the way across the vast ocean of delusion. Instead, the other shore is constantly coming over here to us. Shinran says that, here's a quote, "There's never been any separation. Amida's vast vow always, of itself, grasps and holds beings. This is the necessary way of its working." That's the end of the quote. It's when we relax and trust that we are transformed. It makes me think of trips that I used to take when I was little to the Boston Aquarium with my family. I don't know whether very many people here will have visited there, but this is quite a well-known aquarium on the East Coast, and they have this gigantic fish tank there that's like 3 stories tall. At least, you know, in my memory as a child, it was at least that big. Maybe it's, you know, somewhere around that size. It's this great big tank full of water, and of course that's where they keep the really big fish, right? Like the great big sharks and this sort of thing. And the interesting thing about this aquarium, actually, is that you can go up on the balcony of the 3rd level, and you can look out over the top of the tank. There is no top to the tank. It's open water. Okay, so if you're down below, you can be kind of eye to eye through the glass with the sharks, and then you can go up at the top. You can look right down over on top of them into that open water. So since the top of the tank is open, we'd always go up there and check it out. My dad thought this was really cool. And you know, when I was about the age of my son, he's 3.5, so about that age, we would go there, and my dad would pick me up, and he'd hold me out over the edge so I could see the fish better, right? So he'd hold me out over that open part of the tank there, and I'd look down and I'd see those sharks, and I'd start to get kind of nervous about this, and I'd start squirming around there as he's holding on to me. And you know, I was basically afraid that my dad was going to drop me in, and you know, that'd be the end of me, right? So I was squirming around in order to get away so I could get somewhere safe. But of course, the more I squirmed, the more danger I put myself into in this situation. And actually, I think the sharks could probably read this situation pretty clearly, because whenever this happened, they would start coming up and start circling around underneath me here. And I don't know if sharks have lips, but if they do, they were probably licking them, you know, looking at this kid squirming around, getting ready to get dropped in the drink there, right? So anyways, obviously, I didn't get dropped because I'm here giving this talk with you today, right? The point of this story, of course, is that I would have been a lot safer if I just relaxed and trusted that my father was going to hold on to me. You know, I was only ever in danger when I started to squirm. Otherwise, he wasn't going to drop me, right? So I was never in any real danger except when I failed to trust. In a similar fashion, the Shin teaching, as I've received it, is that through trusting in other power, then we're brought to an awareness of our interconnection and our indebtedness to others. And then it's this sense of indebtedness that leads to the 3rd of my keywords here today, thank. Probably the single most distinctive thing about Shin is that it is only expressive. The true and real practice of the Nembutsu does not beg for salvation. It does not create good karma. It does not focus the mind. It does not bring about any of the benefits that we vainly chase after. Instead, when we realize how we are benefited just as we are, gratitude arises naturally from within, and we express it by saying Nembutsu in joy and humility. Nembutsu in the Shin tradition is a grateful expression of thanksgiving. It's an end, not a means. The path has already been accomplished for us. And our part is simply to relax, trust, and say, thank you, Namo Amida Butsu. This is a one-time and a many-times process. First, we have an initial experience of relaxing, trusting, and thanking, which helps the Shin path to feel meaningful in our own lives. And then throughout our lives, we're able to relax ever more, trust ever more, thank ever more. As Shinran says in the Kyogyo Shinsho, here's a quote, "My joy grows ever fuller, my gratitude and indebtedness grow ever more compelling." This is a really beautiful vision of the spiritual life, where instead of chasing after enlightenment and holiness, we rest in boundless compassion, and we allow our joy to grow ever fuller, where we're compelled by gratitude rather than by fear, by greed, or by obligation. Of course, our expressions of gratitude are not limited to saying the Nembutsu. We can also say thank you by being good to others and by helping to make this world a better place for everyone. As I kind of indicated earlier, I don't think we can necessarily solve all the problems of this suffering world. But for myself at least, my sense of gratitude motivates me to try and improve the lot of others. There's an unlimited number of ways in which we can do this, such as, of course, being kind in our interactions with other people, through volunteering, through voting, and so on. To me, when these are carried out as expressions of thanksgiving, then they become a sort of Nembutsu in action. In a way, it mirrors the trajectory of the Pure Land. First, we are brought to the Pure Land, where we encounter true reality and are freed of our blind passions to become awakened Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Then, we immediately leave the Pure Land and return to samsara, to the suffering world, in order to help out those who are still stuck. In the same way, we relax in trust and are brought to an awareness of our indebtedness, which then leads, quickly, to compassionate action on behalf of others. I believe that this three-part system of relaxing, trusting, and thanking is a message that we should be sharing with others. Although they're very deeply meaningful to me, it often seems that Amida, Pure Land, Shinjin, and so on may be too difficult or foreign for many people to understand or to relate to. The important thing then in that situation is that we communicate what it is that we derive from these core elements of our tradition. This we can do by explaining and showing to others the path to liberation through relaxing, trusting, and thanking. Obviously, by this, I don't mean that we're supposed to hide Amida, hide Pure Land, hide Shinjin, and so on. Only what I mean is that we develop a vocabulary that allows us to transmit Shinran's Dharma ideas without always stressing foreign concepts. Plenty of times I've been in situations where I only had a moment to talk about Shin Buddhism. Perhaps I was going up an elevator and someone asked me about the Buddhist bracelet that I had on my wrist that day. Or maybe I was at work and a coworker passed by my cubicle and happened to notice a Buddhist graphic on my computer screen. In circumstances like this, you don't have the time to explain the entire Jodo Shinshu tradition. And frankly, no one's going to be able to remember the words Namo Amida Butsu or Shinjin once they've walked away, right? Perhaps what we should do when we're asked about Buddhism is reference this sort of formula I'm using here today and say that it's about relaxing, trusting, and giving thanks. And if we have a moment more, we can add that for Shin Buddhists specifically, we relax and trust in the Buddha's compassion. And we say Namo Amida Butsu in thankfulness, and also express our gratitude through service to others. Then, if they're still interested, we can invite friends to visit our temples in order to learn more. But even if they never come to the temple, they're still going to get a positive impression of Shin Buddhism. And, hopefully their own religious lives will be benefited by considering the value of relaxing, trusting, and thanking as spiritual paths. They don't have to become Buddhists. And realistically, Shin is never going to be a majority religion in this or any other country. But we can still help them to be better Christians, better Jews, better Muslims, through reflecting on the value of relaxing, trusting, and thanking. And, some of them will also be in the right place where they do hear the Dharma more fully, and they do come in order to investigate our temples. The important thing is that in this approach, we meet them where they're at, in total ignorance of Jodo Shinshu, rather than expecting them to be able to navigate a whole language of insider terms and concepts. and that we remember that ultimately it isn't us against them. We're all in it together, and if our chance encounters can be of benefit to non-Buddhists, then this is another way of being inclusive-minded without expecting them to have to become just like us. I think we can meet personal challenges with this sort of formula as well. For those of you who have read my book, Buddhism of the Heart, this is a story that I've told in the book, but I'm going to offer it here as well because I think it relates to this topic. It's about when our son was born, about 3.5 years ago, a little more. There were some very serious complications, and both his life and my wife's lives, they were both in danger during the birth. After many hours, they finally managed to get him out, but it wasn't at all clear that my wife was going to survive the process. I can recall her mother pleading with the doctors as my wife was being wheeled away to surgery, begging them, please don't let her die. It was very serious. And through all of this, there was just absolutely nothing that I could do to help. I couldn't help with the surgery, I couldn't stop the bleeding, I couldn't assist in any way at all. I was totally useless and totally helpless. All that I could do was relax, trust, and let things take their course. When I did so, it didn't magically take away all of my concern and anxiety, but it did allow me to realize that things were out of my hands, and that no matter how bad they did get, somehow we were going to make it through, and things were going to work out the way they were going to work out. Letting go of my attachment to saving the situation by myself brought about actually a sudden overwhelming feeling of relief and thankfulness inside me, which transcended the sort of fear that I was feeling. And so while I waited to learn what the future was going to be, I was able to feel grateful for the time I'd been given with my wife. And I was able to appreciate my son's arrival, despite the difficulties of his birth. Unable to stop myself, I actually walked up and down the street outside, saying Nimbutsu, just letting the situation be what it was as I relaxed and returned to Amida Buddha, my foundation. This morning I quoted from Renyo's biography. There's another line in that text which struck me as very odd when I first read it. But as I reflected on it, it made more and more sense to me. It just says that Renyo, who was the leader of a massive religious movement and had plenty of helpers, washed his own children's diapers. This bit of trivia is just kind of thrown in there amongst all the stories about how great Renyo was. When you first read it, you don't know why in the world it was possibly included in this biography. But I have to say, now that I have children of my own, I think I know exactly what Renyo was up to. Surely he changed his own children's diapers because he felt thankful for their lives. And they taught him thankfulness for what had been done for him by his own parents and by others. I know that in my case, having kids has made me very aware of the indebtedness and the sacrifices that have been made on my behalf. So that's relaxing, trusting, and thanking. I believe this is a formula that captures the essence of the Jodo Shinshu process of awakening within our ordinary lives, and which can be communicated to outsiders without needing any specialized jargon. So now I want to move on to the other topic I promised to cover. That's fearlessness. There's a lot of fear in America these days, isn't there? The newspapers and the television are constantly telling us what we should be afraid of and what we should be angry about. We should be afraid of Obama. He's going to send grandma to a death panel. We should be afraid of terrorists. They're going to light their shoes on fire and blow up all the airplanes. We should be afraid of Muslims. They're going to build a mosque on top of Ground Zero and make us all obey Muslim law. We should be afraid of global warming. The polar ice caps are going to melt and we're all going to drown in our beds. The worst part of it all is the conflicting information about health and food. Yesterday eggs were good for you and butter was bad for you. Today butter is good for you and eggs are bad for you. Tomorrow they'll both be bad for you. And then next week we'll be back to where we started, right? You get all this information constantly. And my wife is actually really susceptible to this kind of thing. And I can only say this because she's not here this weekend, right? So she reads a lot of magazines, and every week, we're like sitting at the dinner table, and she tells us about some new study that she's just read that says that something that our family eats or uses or whatever is going to give us 5 kinds of cancer and cause us to grow a new eyeball somewhere on our body or something. And then usually the next week, she'll read a new study that totally contradicts the first one. So the upshot of all this is that we never know how to act. You know, the only message we really receive from all this is that the world is a threatening place, it's full of hidden danger, and it's impossible to know how to avoid it all, so you have to be on constant guard all the time. And, you know, the problem is that this can cause people sometimes to get frozen into an attitude of perpetual fear and anxiety. Of course, some of this is basic Buddhism. The Buddha taught that the world of samsara is inherently topsy-turvy, and that it's touched by suffering. And no one can be fully secure, no matter how rich or powerful or beautiful or smart they are. Only nirvana is stable, peaceful, blissful, and without danger. Shinran affirmed this too, pointing out how his time period was full of troubles, and that only the Pure Land is free of trouble and strife. Obviously, there are a lot of troubles in life, and you know, we should be aware of the problems we face. I'm not saying that we should be like the ostrich who just hides his head in the sand and tries to ignore it all. There are serious challenges that face our world, and serious challenges that we face as individuals. But at the same time, I feel like there's sort of an excess of fear that grips American society. And this is something that Jodo Shinshu can directly offer some help with. A lot of times, we're being told to be afraid, not because people are trying to be helpful to us, but because they can make money off of our fear. They tell us to be afraid of aging, and then they sell us a skin cream to get rid of wrinkles. They tell us to be afraid of illness, and then what do you know? Boom, they've got an expensive medicine right here in their hands. They tell us to be afraid of the other political party, and then they ask us to vote for themselves. So fear isn't just a wise caution anymore. It's basically like a whole industry that's designed to control and exploit us. I don't know if you guys ever watch Fox News, for example. I watch this sometimes. We get this in Canada, and this is one of my ways to keep tabs on what's going on in the US. So, I'd love to just see them start off one day, any day, someday, with a story like, today, Barack Obama was a pretty normal guy. He didn't do anything in particular wrong. There weren't any shootings in any parts of the country that you've never been to and aren't relevant to you. There's really nothing worth getting angry about today. So we'll just spend the next 30 minutes showing videos of puppies and then go to bed. Good night. That's never going to happen. And the funny thing is, if they did do that, they'd probably be out of business the next day, right? Fear sells. Peacefulness and normality, not so much. In such an environment like this, I feel that religion should act as a counterbalance against excessive fear and worry. But what do we actually find when we turn to religion? Many religions are busy playing the fear game too, telling us we better do and believe exactly what they say, or else we're going to suffer a fate that's far worse than, wrinkles, a cold or bad politics, right? Believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, or burn in hell for eternity. Submit to Allah, or be attacked as an infidel. We even find it in Buddhism in several ways. Right action is part of the fundamental Buddhist path, and it goes without saying that we should do our best to act in ways that reduce suffering, both our own and that of others. But some people try to force others to act right by scaring them about karma and punishment. For example, in Thailand, I visited a temple that had a large sculpture park. The theme of the park was the karmic punishments in the hell realms. They had these life-size statues of people being tortured by animal-headed demons, being forced to climb up trees covered in spikes, and all sorts of other gruesome stuff that I won't describe to you here. I got to tell you, it was as bad as any modern-day R-rated horror film that you might see. This hell park was very popular, and the #1 customers they had were school groups. Teachers and parents were always bringing large groups of children to come and see the terrible, bloody tortures caused by bad karma, and they used it to frighten the kids into obeying their parents and not breaking the law. Another way that Buddhists have often used fear is to make money off of others. For example, these sort of hell beliefs, they've historically been very important in Japan as well. Until the 1980s, the Soto Zen school used to teach that all women are sinful and that they're reborn into a hell that consists of a pool of boiling blood where they suffer terribly. The only way to avoid this sort of fate was, guess what? To pay the Zen priests to do a blood pool hell ritual that would free you or your mom from their bad karma. On a less dramatic, but even more profitable scale, this sort of thing is actually very, very common in modern Japan. I don't know if you guys have, too many of you been to Japanese temples in Japan other than Honganji ones? Maybe a few? At most places, you're going to find people selling what they call omamori. These are, oh, we have some idea what this is, right? I've actually seen omamori here in Hawaii, right? So they make them here as well. But there's way more of them in Japan. For those who don't know, these are magic amulets that are used to ward off bad luck. Some temples in the Zen, Nichiren, Shingon, and other traditions make much of their yearly budget off of selling these sort of lucky charms or sort of related rituals that are designed to have similar effects. And they have rituals, or especially these magic amulets, for every kind of fear that the Japanese have. There are omamori that are designed to prevent a bad grade on a test. There are ones to prevent car accidents and plane crashes, ones to prevent illness, ones to prevent injury to your children, and so on. One of the most popular trends is marketing charms to elderly people in Japan who are told that they should be afraid of getting old and dying. So nowadays there are Buddhist pillowcases that you can buy. They've been blessed by Kannon Bodhisattva, and when you lie on it at night, it'll prevent you from going senile, right? Because the pillowcase is up against your brain. Yeah. And there's special Buddhist underwear that you can buy too at the temples. They've been blessed by the priests, so when you wear it, you won't experience incontinence. You know? So that the whole depends industry is out the window in Japan, right? That the Buddhist temples are taking it over. I'm sure it's only a matter of time before they start marketing Buddhist Viagra. You know? This is anything that they can think of that people might want, they go and they sell a product for it now. One extremely successful new trend, actually, is temples related to easy death. You pay the priest, and he prays that you will die suddenly, peacefully in your sleep. You know, so you're giving him money, so he'll pray that you will die. Very interesting. And of course, none of these magical practices actually work. My point here is that religion is very often involved in exploiting our fears, sometimes supposedly for our own good, and sometimes in order to make money or to control us. And it's this fear-ridden situation, both in normal society and in religion, that I think Shinran has something to offer to. Shinran says that people of the Nembutsu are protected by Amida and by all the powers in the universe. For example, when we chant the Shoshinge, we say, quote, "The light of compassion that grasps us illumines and protects us always." Shinran puts it even more eloquently in the Kyogyo Shinsho when he says that ordinary Nembutsu practitioners are, quote, "constantly illumined by the light of the Buddha's heart, grasped and protected, never to be abandoned." Throughout his writings, Shinran constantly assures people that they have nothing to fear because we're watched over by benevolent forces. Among those he lists are Amida, Shakyamuni, Kannon, Daiseishi Bodhisattva, all the Buddhas of the universe, all the gods of heaven and earth, the four Dharma protector kings, dragons. I thought that one's kind of cool. You know, I used to be the nerdy guy who played Dungeons and Dragons, so I was like, oh, okay, cool, dragons. Even evil spirits. And that last item's particularly interesting to me since I'm someone who grew up with a wealth of ghost stories. Throughout Asian Buddhist history, including in Japan, monks have accepted donations in order to pacify or exorcise dangerous spirits. Maybe we could even say that Buddhist monks are the original Ghostbusters. Because really, this was an important part of their professional responsibilities. The Nembutsu, too, was used in this way before Shinran came along, as a way to ward off ghosts and demons. The ancient Japanese believed that they lived in a world of spirits and kami, and that they had to be constantly on their guard. The elite Buddhist institutions like Mount Hiei and Koyasan, they often exploited these fears to keep the masses in line and to gather donations. In fact, the gigantic monastic complex of Inryakuji on Mount Hiei, where Shinran practiced, it was founded in order to protect Kyoto from the supposed bad luck that came from the northeast direction. And the monks up there, they were paid by the government in order to pray for the ruling powers. But after Shinran came down from Mount Hiei and started the Jodo Shinshu movement, he completely threw out all practices designed to protect people from spirits or bad luck, because they're unnecessary. To live in the Nembutsu is to already be protected, he taught. There's something very special going on here with Shinran. Unlike in many religious groups, he doesn't fill people with fear. He never says that we should be afraid of Amida or Kanon or other figures. You know, we don't tell our kids that they better eat all their veggies or else Renyo is going to get them, you know. Often, other people are told that they have to love God, but they're also told to be afraid of God at the same time. Just recently, a Roman Catholic friend of mine told me that God is a jealous God. This is how he understands God as a Catholic. And the Old Testament, he says that, quote, fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. This is an attitude that is not very easy for me to understand. How can you fully love someone who threatens to hurt you or to damn you or even to annihilate you? It just doesn't seem possible to me. And how could something really be God if it possessed such petty, mean-spirited emotions as jealousy and anger? It may seem incredible, but there are large segments of the human race who worship very jealous, very petty gods like this. And there's a great many people who are struggling with a sort of impossible spiritual task of both loving and living in fear of their deities at the same time. Meanwhile, Amida only always embraces all beings, no matter who they are. I think that's a very special message. We never say that Amida is a jealous Buddha, or fear of Amida is the beginning of wisdom. These sentences, they sound absurd or even humorous because they're so completely alien to the Shin tradition. Furthermore, Shinran says that we shouldn't be worried about our afterlife because it's taken care of by Amida. In fact, in Tanisho, Shinran says that he isn't concerned about whether the Nembutsu will lead him to the Pure Land or take him to hell. He just completely trusts in other power and relaxes into his own natural state of being. Of course, elsewhere, Shinran emphasizes that indeed all beings will go to the Pure Land through the assistance of Amida. The point I'm trying to make here is not about beliefs, it's about attitudes. You may or may not believe that Amida literally protects people from harm, or that ghosts exist, or anything else like that. That's not really what's so important here. What's important is to notice that the Nembutsu teaching created by Shinran was designed to function in a way that relieved everyday people of their fear and their anxiety, instead of trying to make money off of it. Shinran also says that we don't have to be afraid of our bad karma. Even if our passions and delusions overwhelm us and we can't help committing some sort of wrong action, we're still embraced and still ultimately will be delivered from hellish consequences. As he puts it, when polluted streams enter the vastness of the ocean, they are all purified and transformed into the essence of enlightenment. All of this means that because of Shinran's insight, Jodo Shinshu is a type of religion that is not based on fear. Because at least in its ideal form, there's no fear of judgment or superstition in Shin Buddhism, that means that there's less inherent economic opportunity for exploitation of the laity than we find in some religions. We don't have to go to confession and make donations to the church in order to pay off our debt to God, nor do we have anything like the televangelists who swear that if you'll just show your love of God by sending in donations, you'll be rewarded by heaven with acres of diamonds. We don't have to pay priests to keep us safe from ghosts. We don't have to buy lucky charms in order to protect us when we're driving in the car or something like that. We do have funeral and memorial services, quite a lot of those, but they're supposed to be about comforting the living and remembering those that we love, not about enabling the deceased to go to the Pure Land. They're not instrumental in that fashion, the way such funerals are usually understood in other Buddhist denominations. Amida has already embraced them, and we have nothing to worry about. Therefore, if we're too poor or otherwise, for some reason, unable to hold a memorial, it doesn't matter in the larger scheme of things. We also don't have as much expensive paraphernalia around funeral services and tombstones that you see in other forms of Buddhism. Now, I know that in actual practice, we do have a lot of the same sort of periodic memorial services and posthumous ordinations, and if you want to, you can buy the big expensive tombstone that almost seems like sometimes a class denominator. So we have some of this stuff like in other denominations too. But fundamentally, these things are not central to the logic of Shinshu practice. And if we stopped doing them tomorrow, there wouldn't be any impact on the Shin teaching or the Shin understanding of things. There's other implications of Shinran's approach to religion. Shinran said that we don't need to do anything in order to earn a spot in the Pure Land. In fact, he said that if we egotistically try to become saints or Buddhas, then we're going to fail, because self-attachment is the source of troubles, according to Buddhism. Instead, Shinran implored us to let go of self-clinging and trust in power beyond self. Whereas our limited efforts may fail, other power never fails to bring us to the fulfillment of the Buddhist path. Therefore, we don't need to be afraid of our negative personality traits or limitations. All of our personal failings are taken in by Amida and transformed into the wisdom of enlightenment. So ultimately, our bad aspects do not hold us back. I think this is really a wonderful gift. We may be lazy or slow-witted or hyperactive or judgmental or whatever. It doesn't matter. In the long run, those things will not prevent us from receiving liberation. We're embraced, warts and all. Therefore, there's no need for anxiety in Jodo Shinshu. We can just relax and say the Nimbutsu in gratitude. This is why Rinyo talked about Shinjin as Anjin, the peaceful heart. Those who have awakened to the grasp of Amida are at peace, without fear and anxiety. Sure, they may have difficult times in their lives, but fundamentally, they know that they're enveloped in great compassion, and every day is another chance to recognize all that they receive and to say thank you. The flip side of this is that if there's nothing we need to do to get into the Pure Land, then we're enabled to try our best without fear of failure. If you try to live a moral life, but ultimately you can't help the fact that when you drive at night, your car kills bugs, and you can't give up your attachment to teriyaki chicken or whatever, it's okay. You don't have to be perfect in Jodo Shinshu. And that actually gives us the permission to simply try to be our best, whatever that means for each of us as individuals. If you're not very good at meditation, or you can't remember all the steps in the Noble Eightfold Path, or you don't really understand what emptiness means, it's okay. To the extent that we manage to live as good Buddhists, our lives and the lives of those around us will be enriched and benefited. And to the extent that we fail to live as perfect Buddhists, we'll still be drawn on by other power and still enter the Pure Land together. In religion, Shinran is my main guide and role model. And when I think of him, I think of a man who is deeply in touch with reality and who is brave in his beliefs. In the Kyogyo Shinsho, he points out that fearlessness is one of the names of nirvana. He was the sort of person who was willing to speak truth to power, as they say. He had the strength to stick to his unpopular views that Amida embraced everyone, even the poor and the illiterate. He went into exile, and he even criticized the emperor himself. You know, that is chutzpah right there, especially, you know, in pre-modern Japan. He was truly fearless, but he wasn't a jerk about it. The Pure Land way gave him not only comfort, but it also gave him courage. And he did what he felt was right, helping others even when he knew that there was going to be a cost to himself. I think we can take a lesson for ourselves from this. We live in a non-Buddhist culture. Now, things are not nearly as bad as they used to be. If you have any doubts about that, you know, just ask the Nisei what it used to be like to be out of step with mainstream American culture. Canada was the same way too, I have to say. Canadians like to talk about how they're friendlier and nicer and more tolerant than Americans. And that might be true today, but it was not true historically. They were just as nasty back in the day. It's just the way things are. Today things, though, are, you know, they are much, much better here and in Canada, thank goodness. But nonetheless, as Buddhists, we're still a small minority, and we can run into problems. More to the point, though, we ourselves can be the problem. We may not talk about Buddhism with others because we may be afraid that they may reject us. Or, and this is a common thing I hear, we may be afraid that we won't be able to explain Jodo Shinshu very well, and that we might be embarrassed if they ask us about something we don't know how to answer. So, from the fear of the possibility of maybe receiving a single question about Buddhism that we find difficult, we fail to even talk about it at all with others who might benefit from encountering the Dharma. When such fears arise, I hope we can think of Shinran's example and take heart. The difficulties we face in telling others about Jodo Shinshu are nothing compared to the ones that he faced. And yet he was able to endure genuine hardship and cause the Nembutsu to flourish throughout Japan. More than 7 centuries later, the efforts he made are still paying off all the way here in Honolulu. Also, in the same vein, the challenges that the Issei and the Nisei faced in being Buddhist in the first half of the 20th century, they make our own difficulties look very small by comparison. So, I hope that if we have any fear, we can put that away and go boldly forward with courage instead. If Shin Buddhism, as I approach it here, is a religion of no worries, then that's a message that we can apply in our own lives and we can seek to tell others about as well. For ourselves, I think of something I read in an essay published by the Honganji International Center. They said, quote, "Through the Nembutsu, we discover a way to live our life to the utmost, with the appreciation for the splendors of life." To me, that really captures the spirit of Jodo Shinshu. We are given a way to live our life to the utmost, without fear and anxiety. Instead, all of that energy that in some other religions is taken up with fear and worry is used for appreciating the splendors of life. How marvelous. In my opinion, this is a message that we can share with others. If we look around at society, we're going to find fairly large numbers of 2 kinds of people. Those who believe that religion must involve terror and anxiety in the face of an angry and dangerous God, and those who feel that religion is a con game left over from an earlier ignorant age and designed to frighten people into submission. Both of these 2 groups can benefit from exposure to Jodo Shinshu, which suggests that religion can flourish without fear and enhance our lives in this rather stressful and materialistic culture that lacks appreciation for the great fortune we experience in North America and the sort of sacrifices that have been made to support our lifestyles. In Jodo Shinshu, the sort of religion of fearlessness, as I've depicted it here, we're given the gift of a peaceful heart and a mind free from religious anxiety. In this way, I think we can see that Shin is not just another old Japanese religion, but in some ways, it acts as a type of revolution in human religious history. I hope we can appreciate this very profound sort of teaching that Shinran started and do our part to keep it going. And as we rise above our fears and seek to offer the riches of our tradition to others outside the Shin community, we can teach them about the importance of relaxing, trusting, and thanking. So with the combination of the sort of universalistic vision that I described in my first lecture, and then trying to find a plain English form of communication that conveys our basic Shin Buddhist values, I believe that we can help Jodo Shinshu to become a religion that's adapted to contemporary America. And I believe that this will help us to reach out and be able to include more of the sort of incredible diversity of peoples that we find in the United States today. So that's my talk, and thank you very much.